Welcome to the Invisible India podcast. I'm Jessica.
And I'm Abhishek. We are a cross-cultural couple doing life in India, exploring the lesser-known mysteries of Indian culture,
Interviewing fascinating figures who have chartered new territories, and sharing life as we raise our multicultural family amongst the complexities of modern Indian life.
Wanted to give an update on the flooding situation that happened in our city. Within 48 hours of rain, entire city was affected. A lot of mayhem and chaos everywhere.
Yes.
And basically, most of the streets, there are hundreds of streets in our town of 3 million people. Most of the streets were submerged and up to waist to chest deep water. So basically, many of the cars were in the parking lot were completely ruined as they were submerged in the water. And many streets, there was no traffic anymore, and people couldn't get out of the house. No rickshaws, no autos. Basically, the only way to go from one place to another was to wade in the water. So this was what happened, and this lasted in our neighborhood for about a week. And this meant that we did not get out of the house for 48 hours.
I didn't leave for 4 days.
Yeah. 2 or 3 days we were totally stuck in the water because we didn't want to go in the waist or chest deep water, and we didn't know what was in there. And of course the drainage and the sewage system is not at par here for the urban standards. I'm sure that all of that was undone. Manhole was open and many of the sewage was in the water. We even saw dead cats and dead rats, and it's just stinking and disgusting pretty much. But this is what happens when you have officials not doing their job properly. They just get the job and that's it. They do the bare minimum to keep the pen pushers or whatever you want to call them. They do not strategize. They do not invest. Most of the money is just eaten up by the people who are working in these departments. And this is what causes, because 48 hours of rain should not have affected the city to this extent. Recently they were getting ready in Japan to have a hurricane, and so they had barricaded their people's homes had been barricaded, and different precautionary measures had to be taken to withstand that hurricane. So that makes sense that your city can be affected to that extent where you have waist deep, chest deep water and it can come into your home. But here there was no hurricane, there was no actual river flooding or the sea coming into the city. It was just rainwater, heavy rains, and that should not cause the flooding to this extent. So basically it is corruption and inability of officials to do their job properly throughout the year that causes these type of things to happen.
So we were stuck in the house I was stuck for 4 days, and Abhishek was actually just coming back from a trip in the middle of this chaos. Posted some on our Instagram when it was happening. He had to actually take a cycle rickshaw with his luggage. So by the airport where he came in, it wasn't too bad, knee-deep water or something. Even people could actually get in and out and cars could go through it. But as you got into our area, it got deeper and deeper and deeper. And so a lot of the taxis were refusing to go. They said, we're not even going to go to your area.
One of my good friends with good heart came to pick me up from the airport and take me as close as he could to our apartment. And he dropped me about half a kilometer, which is 0.3 miles away from the apartment, and basically a rickshaw guy pulled me all the way here, and he charged me 4 or 5 times the amount of money that one would charge if the land was dry. And he basically pulled me with my backpack on the seat. These are cycle rickshaws, mind you. He wasn't riding the rickshaw because he couldn't even ride it because there was so much water on the ground. So he pulls me and he brings me all the way to the dry parking lot of the apartment. That's how I came back in this mayhem, and I was in the part of Southeast Asia, which was amazing, and it was dry, and the rains did not cause this kind of damage. And when I came back here, it was a downer to come back to this type of situation where, basic amenities were being affected. We didn't have electricity for 18 hours, I think, at one point. And our battery, we have battery to back up our power, and that wasn't working. We were really went into the crisis mode because of this 48-hour heavy rain, and then that caused the flooding.
Yeah, so as soon as he came back, I was really happy because I'd been kind of stuck in the house for 2 days with the kids with limited power, and I had food, but I was starting to kind of get nervous because I didn't really have any way to get out, and neighbors and stuff, of course, were a huge help, and I was trying to help others. Do you have milk? Yes. Do you have sugar? Yes. Do you have tea? Yes. Do you have tomatoes? Yeah. We're all sharing with each other, so that was a help. And but for some people that were really stuck, they live in a private house and they literally couldn't get out at all. So fortunately, we live in an apartment complex, which we have, at least, 50 to 100 other families that live in this complex. So we can all kind of help each other. But man, it was rough. These are kind of some of the things that make you feel, why do I live here? But these are the rough days, the rough times. So how we got out? We basically eventually completely lost power, and it wasn't going to come back. And nobody was going to come help and fix it. So we had to leave our house, and we basically picked up our 2 kids with a backpack and started going across the water. And at one point, it was almost waist deep we had to wade through. So it was pretty terrible and pretty disgusting, but we packed a backpack and waded across to another place so we could stay. So this was a pretty difficult situation, and honestly, we're some of the privileged people. We have plenty of food, and we have, people to help us, but there are some people that were really in a huge amount of danger. There's a lot of electrical problems that happen when this stuff goes wrong, and I think we had, I don't know how many people died, around 30 people in our city died because of the floods. And it's not necessarily drowning, it's a lot of these like weird power things or people falling into ditches that they didn't know were there because they're completely submerged in water. And so it's just tough. It's just terrible. So we're glad to be out of it. And now let's get into our episode with Chris Hyun and talk about India's sanitation. We thought this would be a great add-on to this topic. Hey, Jessica here, and I am really thrilled to have a longtime friend of Abhishek and I with us to discuss India's waste management challenge. Chris Hyun is a PhD candidate at University of California, Berkeley, a scientist, an intellectual, a voice for communities in India that may be a bit marginalized, that may not have access to all the technological advancements that we take for granted in the West for some of the basic community needs. He's up on all the new technologies in waste management, in water purification, and using water as a priceless resource and what that means in our world today, and so much more, which we're going to get into. So he is here with us. I'm super excited. You've been friends with us for I don't know how long, 20 years?
Has it been 20 years?
I don't know. I just randomly said that.
How old are we?
I don't know. So we've been friends for a long time, and our paths have crossed in many different ways. You were the best man in our wedding, and we go back a long time. But it's really cool that I'm really grateful that our paths are still crossing, even though we've gone in so many different directions in life, and we still have some things in common. The timing is really interesting for this interview because we just went through a huge challenge where we live with flooding, with complete failure of our local drainage and sewage systems, and people were just really infuriated. So you're here with us in our town, and you've seen how bad things are, and so I just want to get into that with you a little bit about your research, what you think some of the issues are, what are some of the resolutions, what are some the technologies and advancements that are taking place. So can you tell just a little bit about how you got into this and why you're interested specifically in India's water and waste management and the other things that you're focused on?
Sure. I was actually living in Varanasi, and I had done my master's there at the Banaras Hindu University, focused on the Ganges River. One of the main pollutants of the Ganges River at Varanasi is unsafely treated sewage, because all of the sewage would drain into the Ganges River, and it's one of the biggest problems there still till today. When I started my PhD, I focused a lot on drinking water, but then I started to kind of go back to those roots and think again, okay, our drinking water is polluted in different cities of South Asia, and sanitation is a huge problem with that. And so I got more and more interested in that as I went through my PhD and gone through field work. So I started to connect with different organizations that were focused on sanitation and looking at why has this been such a long-standing problem. And to be honest, it's a problem all over the world. Even in so-called Western and developed countries, you would see places in New York City where they combine, it's called combined sewage overflow, where when there are storms, large storms like Hurricane Sandy in New York City, then you'd have the combination of stormwater and sewage, and that just overflows into the streets and into the ocean. So you have this problem, but India then had adopted during the turn of the century and then in the 90s through different schemes, the same types of sewage systems, and sometimes those same technologies are less effective in cities in India with things like intermittent water supply. So if you put in all those sewage pipes, there's not enough water to push the sewage to treatment plants, and so treatment plants are under capacity, meaning that they don't treat all the sewage that is needed, but then when the rains come, and then they overwhelm the sewage systems and the treatment systems, and then you have the overflow problems. So there are various reasons for flooding. We are now thinking more ecologically in places like New York City and across India of, okay, how do we prevent flooding? We used to think we have to get the water out of the city as soon as possible, but then all this rapid water collecting and accumulating also causes flooding. So can we get water to soak into the ground? And that's what we're trying to get other cities to do, because it's all covered with concrete or stone. And so combining these kind of more ecological solutions with treatment solutions that are also a little bit more sustainable. So as we know, there's a lot of intermittent power supply in India. And so treatment systems that are high energy intense cost a lot of money for operation and maintenance. And sometimes there are a lot of blackouts in different cities. So if you don't have electricity or you can't pay for the electricity, then how can you keep a treatment plant running? And they also use up a lot of water. So I work with different organizations that try to minimize the amount of energy it takes and minimize the amount of water it takes to treat, let's say, toilet water or gray water, which is all the other water usually comes out of a household.
You focus specifically on India globally?
I focus primarily on urban India, so small towns and large cities, and sanitation. So sanitation is very broad, but I focus mainly on what would be considered liquid waste.
Sounds lovely.
Yeah.
So what are some of the challenges that India has specifically? You mentioned a few, like the intermittent power, not constant access to water supply. Is deforestation something that's a concern? Is rapid urbanization a concern? What are some of the other unique challenges that India faces?
I focus primarily on what would be considered sanitation planning. So how cities plan for sanitation, if at all. And so a lot of the issue is this technological issue of wanting the big system, but maybe a smaller system or more decentralized system would be more appropriate and more manageable. And governments, either state, city, central governments, are willing to pay for large systems. And it's harder for them to consider these smaller systems that could be put in place. And not only that, it's what I say is a capex versus opex problem. And this has been, a decades old problem. Governments are willing to pay for the capital expenses to install all these systems, but it's not fully thought through, planned, or considered all the operation and maintenance of the systems.
Maintenance is always an issue.
Yeah. So this is for most infrastructure around the world, but particularly in India, this happens over and over again. So a major problem in the sanitation sector is this capex-opex gap. Even with ecological systems, more where operation and maintenance is very low cost, low skill, low energy intensive, and low water intensive, they still require a minimum amount of maintenance. And so this is something that we need to consider a lot. And so my focus in research, part of my focus in research is what is called capacity building. Capacity building has a lot of definitions, but one of them is support for local institutions and local engineers and planners to maintain systems. We find that most cities need hand-holding. A lot of times technology is dumped in a city and just the city is left not even making the decision to take that technology, and then it's not maintained. Cities don't know how to make those technological decisions because they might have one junior engineer, and that junior engineer never learned about certain technologies. And so that's part of what I'm seeing is I sit in workshops with engineers and planners, and I interview different government officials and say, what is the decision-making process for sanitation? We have this like Swachh Bharat, and now we're going into a new phase of sanitation across India. They've built all of the toilets, but many of the toilets, the liquid and the solid waste that come from the toilets that have all been built have no place to go. So we've accumulated all of this, and it's become very concentrated, and now it could leak into drinking water or different things like that, or gets dumped somewhere, or the pipes go nowhere or into surface water bodies. And so now we are going into another phase in India, across India, of now we have to treat this fecal sludge or wastewater, and now we have to consider what can both urban and rural areas handle. So that's the question now. So I'm looking at, okay, what are the policy recommendations that I could make for the decision makers in terms of what technologies can work, but more, what is the proper decision-making process?
Do you feel like a lot of the recommendations are taken, or, does the Swachh Bharat campaign really focused on this? I know there's been a ton of focus on, getting toilets installed and all of that, but then there's the maintenance issue, there's all these other issues. So do you feel like the difference is really being made, or what do you feel?
Toilets are being built, have been built. Not necessarily all have been used. Some need water. In terms of recommendations, the more and more deeply I get into understanding how decisions are made, the more I understand the political challenges. So as governments shift from the center down to the state, down to the cities, then you shift all the people that have been involved in the planning. So an election comes up, and then maybe the party changes, then a whole line of administration may change. And then you have a new set of people that may have agreed to one contract for toilets and treatment. Now these new administrators don't know anything about that contract or don't want that contract anymore. And so you may have been pushing for maybe more ecologically friendly and more sustainable systems, but now you have a whole new cater of people to talk to in the administration to convince. And so this has happened in various cities, and so you just have to consider it's not just a technological problem, it's not just an engineering problem. Different organizations have been working, okay, maybe we work from the bottom up, and this is part of my research. Is it bottom up, top down, middle out? So like bottom up is, do you work with the individual city and just help them as much as possible and build something with them? Or do you work from the top down, work with a state or center a state and say, okay, if we work with a state and they really agree, then they can like spread this helpful technology and system and decision-making process throughout many different cities? Or do you work from kind of the middle out, like work with both of them at the same time? So how do we help cities make these decisions? And then, of course, there's always the funding problem.
Like what you said about it not just being a technological problem, there are political problems, there are social issues or ceilings or prejudices that are stopping a lot of these things from coming forth. I was listening to a podcast called The Seen and the Unseen by Amit Verma. He talks about Swachh Bharat and how in many of the villages, the whole ghar ghar mein toilet ho jao, whatever, jo bhi tha, stopping open defecation and having toilets available to each and every person. He was talking about how there are actually a lot of social and caste-driven restraints, especially because you're dealing with something so sensitive as human waste, which we all know. I mean, one thing I did not mention about Chris is that he's been a student of Indian culture. आप हिंदी भी बोलते हैं, बहुत अच्छी हिंदी बोलते हैं, आप बहुत सालों से इंडिया में थे और आप भारत के बारे में बहुत कुछ जानते हैं. ऐसे नहीं कि आप बाहर से आए, आप यहाँ रिसर्च कर रहे हैं और वापस जाके सब चीज़ भूल जाएंगे. You know, you really care about India. You're a person that really is very connected. You have a lot of friends here. You have a lot of relationships rooted here. I see that you are really invested in getting underneath some of these issues. Do you see that there are a lot of other social issues or issues of inequality that are hindering the progress of proper sewage management and water resource management?
So totally. As you said with the toilets, culturally, some people don't want to use the toilet depending on where it is. Some people have a problem with it having a toilet inside the house, or just having in a confined, dirty space to go to the toilet, and they'd rather a cleaner, open space, which they've been using. And a lot of people didn't consider those things. And you look at the various studies, and a lot of villages and towns do not use the toilets that were built. Other aspects is you can look at things like history. In terms of British history, a lot of the water and drainage history that happened in the turn of the century across India in the larger cities were very much Eurocentric and kind of separating, because a lot of it happened during the revolt. So there was a sanitation movement. This is a paper that's going to come out that I'm going to write.
All right.
So there's a
waiting for it.
sanitation movement from the West that was kind of related to environment, not only germ theory, but environment. Oh, the environment may cause sickness. And they found that with the European armies. It was like, actually, the condition of our hospitals are unsanitary and actually may cause more deaths. And so then this went into India with the British Army, and they saw the same things, and they were like, we need to create more open spaces, drainage, but for the Europeans, right? The Europeans in India.
Not for everyone.
Yeah. But this was also all tied in with the revolt, right, and feeling unsafe and unsecure. So there's all this interweaving of politics, of inequality, and then sanitation, water and sanitation separated the Europeans from Indians. And so Europeans had these nice cantonments made, or row houses with the nice drainages, and then they could have air flowing through it and their water drained nicely, while they left the other parts more crowded without proper sanitation. And these, 150 years later, persist. So then the British leave, but then are replaced by the wealthier communities. And so these inequalities persist throughout. And often when we put in large infrastructure, like for water and sewage, most of the benefit goes to the middle and upper class. It's kind of a subsidy for them. And so how do we then help the marginalized and the lower income groups? And that's what these type of more decentralized technologies try to do, try to get technology more dispersed that could treat the sewage. Another social and cultural issue in general is that liquid waste is often invisible. Like liquid waste often gets hidden or you get used to it.
Yeah.
And then putting in a treatment system for sanitation is often invisible. So solid waste, sometimes you can see the difference. I think roads gets cleaned up. But when you put in a fecal sludge or a sewage treatment plant, that the plant is somewhere, and then somehow you put the pipes that are invisible. And then so sometimes people don't see the difference.
Or all you see are the roads getting torn up around you, and you see the immediate inconvenience of my roads are torn up, the traffic is stopped up because of these pipes, and it's short-term versus long-term.
Yeah. That's also there. So it's kind of, it's more invisible than, let's say, getting a water pipe into your home. You already are shunting all the wastewater out, and you don't know where it goes. It gets dumped, on land or farmland a little bit farther away or into an open drain. And so you still don't see it. So when a proper system is put in, then you don't see the effects as well. And then even if you have a more ecologically friendly one, then it's a little bit even more invisible because they're smaller systems. And so this is one reason why cities sometimes and states sometimes don't want it, because then you don't have this big piece of technology that you put in as a politician or as an administrator, and then you don't have that legacy for your party.
Yeah, or a toilet where everyone can see there's a toilet in my village, there's a toilet in my slum. It's a very visible check in the box, which you can say, we installed this, we installed that, and whether people actually use it or not, you've done your job as a checking the box for the voters.
So a lot of the infrastructure for sanitation is invisible, and so sometimes
very challenging.
Yeah, residents or politicians or administrators, it's not top priority. And water is a very high priority, and so water and sanitation funding sometimes competes. And so at the national level, they've pushed a lot for sanitation in terms of the toilet building in the past few years. Now the budget is swinging back, and so we're yet to see how the budget for sanitation will turn out in the coming years.
Can you talk a little bit about some of the innovative things that companies or municipalities, different cities are doing? This is such a huge problem, and so it might be good to kind of think about and hear some of the innovations or things that are happening in this field.
So there's no one magic technology, and just combining different technologies might be great for cities depending on their size and density. One of the biggest costs are sewage pipes. And once they're in, it's also expensive to extend it when the population grows. So you can have different alternatives. Maybe you have the pipes and you have a sewage treatment plant or a few of them, but then maybe in the peripheries or in dense slum areas, you can put in different technologies that are easier to maintain. You can put them underground. So I work with an organization called CDD, and they're able to put systems underground that are gravity fed. And it's basically, a lot of houses have septic tanks. And so what they do is, it's kind of a glorified septic tank. Septic tanks do some level of treatment, but if you design a septic tank or a tank in a certain way, it could do a lot more to treat the sewage. And so that's something that can be easily done. You put either under a sidewalk or under land that you could put a garden on top, which they often do. And then other simple things are drying beds. So these aren't very exciting technologies. You just put the shit into a drying bed and leave it. People are not going to like this. So a combination of these. Another idea is, if you already have a sewage treatment plant, is to add a little bit more treatment. So some houses are not connected to a sewage pipe, but they do have septic tanks. So you collect the septage through trucks, and then this concentration of septage a sewage treatment plant can't handle. But if you augment it and do co-treatment, so you have another tank or another layer of treatment like these glorified septic tanks to treat it, and then you treat them all together in one plant. So these are all ideas people are working with.
Are there any places that are a bit further ahead in thinking about these things, any cities or that we can look to as really innovative?
So in terms of states, states that are moving ahead with this are Orissa and
Wow, that's it.
AP Telangana and Tamil Nadu. There are various cities across each of these states that are rolling out with larger and larger versions of what I just talked about. One of the pilot projects is near Bangalore in a small town called Devanahalli. And so there was a major pilot project that was an FSTP, or fecal sludge treatment plant, which has been a model for a lot of the other plants. But then there's all this management. So like with the states, there were people at the state level that were excited. And so it worked in those states for the administrators there and the politicians there.
They had buy-in.
Yeah, they had buy-in.
Just to conclude, I feel like we could talk about this for a long time. I have a lot more questions. What would be your dream if you could leave a legacy? And this has really been a life's work for you. You've been involved in work in India for a long time already. You lived in India for 10 years in your 20s and 30s. And if you could leave a legacy in this field, what would it look like? What would be your dream to see happen in 30 years down the road from now?
Wow. I mean, to start with something negative and then go into positive.
Okay.
Like earlier this year, I was writing my research papers. And in the end, I wrote, after 6 years of working on this specific problem in urban India, I found that there are no good answers, in a sense. But what I do believe in is capacity building. It's a broad term, but in terms of continually inspiring people to work on this problem. Because it'll keep changing as India changes, as urban India changes. It's a dynamic problem because of the politics that keep changing and the landscapes that keep changing. So I've found some great people that are really earnest at the grassroots level. They want to see an India that's clean, that's taking care of the sanitation in a sustainable manner, and those people have really inspired me. We work on workshops together, and I've seen them teach others, other engineers, planners, and I would love to just see that, like that inspiration and that authenticity for seeing sustainable sanitation, a healthier India for everyone, and care for the poor along with that, just continue to multiply. So I hope my research supports those type of people that I've been working with to do an even better job. So I've been working with them to help them with their workshops, improve their reach in terms of how to teach better about the technologies and the planning. And in next week, I'm helping out with a contractors workshop. So how to train contractors for this type of work who are crucial in the whole process. And all the people that I work with these workshops are really earnest, really believe in what they do, and really have a vision for a healthier and cleaner India.
That is really encouraging. I really do hope that in your work and in the work of others in this field that we can move the needle on this issue. It's not a singular issue. It's so complex and it's so, like you said, invisible, which is part of the complexities that we try to get into in this podcast. What are the invisible issues that you see? It's not so simple. Some of the challenges that we face here and are really complex and are really deep, and I appreciate the nuance that you are able to recognize in this, and the commitment that you see that this is not just such a simple problem, that you're trying to bring awareness to this. So thank you for what you're doing, and thanks for your commitment to this. It's really encouraging and inspiring to know that there are people that care about this. Not just Indians, but people who really do want to see India rise up, and not just because we've got great malls and everyone has new cars and this. There are more deeply seated issues which affect each and every person in this country. So I'm so glad that we could do this episode.